Mr. Chairman,
and eventually,
due to
only
the facilitative effort I had with the other managers within the company, in the year
only claim
2012,
at that time
we had a record production
that
of 71,000
that
tons of
house
sugar made
had been purchased
for the year 2012,
without
something that had never been attained since the inception of the company.
at the time.
And in the year, we also made a
From
profit
the president.
of nearly 800 million
We had just
shillings.
come into that
The company had never
institution
declared any
with
profit.
the
In
exit
fact, it
of
was
the
insolvent.
This was the new administration.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Government
that
documents,
is
when
SAUL
it's changed
SIMIYU.
government, takes forever to get them.
So how will you bring this
Eventually,
valuable asset to
was
IEBC?
established and found where it was.
When I joined the Zoya
The
Sugar,
truth.
I was
What the management
charged
was
an
doing
outsider because
was only implementing what the cabinet
there are
did.
many others who had been there working there, and I was from legal
Because of change of
practice.
government,
So at the time when I was
with a challenge with that. But eventually, that was also
promoted to the position of managing director, obviously,
Thank you, Chair.
the more assistant managers thought
So Bwana Kakai, were you
it
dismissed
was
from the
unfair,
judiciary
I would say.
or
But
you left
I was
at
able
will?
to harness
when
the
you are
capabilities of all the senior managers, the engineers, the agriculture
definitely you'll be told to go.
experts, transport experts, for us to be able to
So as an
work
advocate,
together as a
after
team
clearance, did you seek
to
redress?
get this
At that time, I was.
accolades that I've just indicated. In fact,
I decided to
to
forget
mention also that in the same year 2012,
because some
in
of
terms
those
of
things
good human
were done
relations
by people I didn't
practice,
understand.
we were
Because I'm a Christian, I forgave. And I moved on
noticed by
and started doing other
the
things,
Ministry of
including this
Agriculture. We
election.
usually had
So I forgave them.
yearly congregations where
So in the records in
companies
Kenya,
would
that
be
you have been dismissed
given
for gross misconduct, for violating
to say some congratulatory tag for
No,
either
that
being
was not
perfect
the-
or good in
that will
audit.
not be the law.
For
That
that
will not
year,
be the
Zoya
thinking, that will
Sugar
not be the
was
understanding.
singled
I
out
was not
as
dismissed on those levels.
having wonderful human resource
What were the
practices, and we were given
You
that
know,
accolade.
when that happened,
to be able
they
to
said that everybody must,
attain
must
high
come
production,
and, processes must take place.
a production that had never been attained by the company before,
Come in and do the
it
investigation
required
and so forth and so on.
skills.
So then,
Skills to
ideally,
steer
everybody was then led to
managers you have hardly worked with for a long time to be able
that's
to
what
see your
happened.
vision and agree that how you can work together for the betterment of the company. I think I can harness those skills that brought all these managers together for us
There are
to
some
make
rulings
the gains and achievements that we did
put in
in the Sugar Company.
your documents.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And those rulings,
Thank you. Just out of curiosity, you made 71,000 metric tons
one
in
in the
2012, you said.
court and another in the
Correct,
High Court.
Mr. Chairman.
So was this out of
And actually,
existing
it was
cane
about
or
withdrawal
it was
of
cane
the
coating?
case by
Because notice that this is the same time that Mumias was going down.
But I've not heard you mention
Mr.
it
Chairman,
now.
something else perhaps
That's a
I different.
different
There
case
was
from
never
what my colleague
any cane poaching by
It's
Zoya
not
Sugar.
clear what
If
you're
anything,
explaining
the
from
cane that
the
was poached
documentation
during
that
that
you've
period was
submitted.
ours.
Thank you very
And
much. Thank you. I
through,
think
again, my
what I've
collaborative
used
efforts
that
with the
to
managers in agriculture,
and those
we
two
managed
rulings
to
were
develop a
the
lot
ones
of
that
cane.
withdrew those
And
criminal
we had excess. In fact, we were giving out cane to
ones that I spoke about.
Mumias Sugar, Botali Sugar Company, and West Kenya. Because of the excess cane that we had developed during my period. And even after the time I left in 2015, we had sufficient cane for milling.
when the cases were withdrawn.
Congratulations. I want to ask Linda to
And they are on
ask
record.
some questions. Madam Linda, please. Okay.
Thank you,
Karen,
Chairman.
do you want
No,
to
Mr.
engage in-
SIMIYU. I heard you say that
So, Mr. Kakai,
while at Zoya
the
Sugar you
cases
had to
were
harness some
withdrawn under
skills
Section 210
that
or
were
cases
important
they
to
withdraw
help you
the cases.
in executing your mandate.
The,
Now, are you
after
able
the-
to tell this panel
at the time
what
when the cases
skills
were withdrawn,
are
there was a
those
lot of
that you
investigations that
harnessed?
had taken place.
A little bit of misgiving.
That's under what the circumstances
Like I
which
said,
people with
I
those
was
cases.
a kind of an outsider coming from the legal profession.
And when you look at that ruling, it
the
explains
whispers were that
under what
a lawyer
circumstances
can't
the
run a
company withdrew
huge
that case.
manufacturing concern.
So it was withdrawn.
My ability to harness their
Chair,
different
sorry to follow
skills.
Now,
My
you
ability
will
to
not
identify
use
that
volumes.
all of us
That
can do,
it is not about
and alone you can
they
do
were
much.
done on the basis of
That is what
judgment of
I intend to bring
Engineer Kamau, the ESCC,
to the IEBC.
investigating.
And
So
I
it's
know
not
that
about
IEBC
the
has a large
capability.
pool of well-qualified
It is the fact
persons,
that ESCC, when
must
they
be
were
lawyers,
investigating, they were not properly
must be
constituted as a
finance
committee.
specialists,
So,
with whom,
and I hear you
if
are saying
the approach
you
is
are
right,
acquitted,
the
you didn't want to
approach
follow the
that
tape. So,
recognizes the value of each and every one of us,
or
the
clarify for us.
value that we need to work together,
It happened
that
10 years
together
ago.
we are better than
This is an issue that
one,
happened 10 years ago,
then
2015.
we shall be able to
And when
steer through some of the problems
went
that
to
have
court.
beset the IEBC.
of course, we defended
And what
ourselves
competencies do
And,
you believe
eventually
are
after-
essential
about almost all
for
witnesses had actually
the
testified.
chairperson to be able to execute
at
his
that time,
mandate?
In his
Thank you,
wisdom,
Mr. Chairman and members.
and looking at Engineer Kamau's
IEBC has
case, because that was an active case
a
at the
large
time,
pool of
in his opinion, then
stakeholders.
the DPP felt that he
We
would
have
withdraw those
the main one, political parties that
for the last 10
certainly
years. For the last
must
10
be
years,
recognized.
the
They are
processes have not had
the political leaders,
complaint,
they are
had anything.
the other stakeholders that we have to deal with them in terms of supplies,
There's
the
no active
media,
case, in short,
and unless
in court.
you are able to give them sufficient recognition,
Thank you.
unless you are able
Professor
to
Adams Olo.
understand that all of us are fighting one common cause, and unless we are transparent in the manner in which we execute this mandate, together with knowledge spilling over to all the stakeholders in equal measure, then we stand the chance of perhaps being accused of
these cases against you.
being favoring particular sides, favoring particular political dispensations. That should not happen. What we need to do is to move forward together with all the stakeholders, bring them together, and have one vision together as we move towards ensuring that we have an election that's
usually
ready.
face intense scrutiny.
So,
And you can
in
see
your
the
career
questions
journey,
coming
do you have any particular instance
because
where
all these responses you've
pressure
given,
was put upon yourself
or all
in
the questions that
execution
have
of
been
your
asked,
mandate in whatever capacity
would not have been
that
asked
tested your
if
leadership
during your
skills
introduction,
and you came out strongly?
when you talked
If
about
there is,
your
Would you like to
tenure
share
in
that
the
with this
judiciary,
panel?
Somewhere around
come up
2011 or 2010, I can't recall
and said
exactly.
that
I was in Nairobi
judiciary
on official duty,
was the only thing you talked about and
and
repeated.
I was told that there had been a breakdown in the
When
powerhouse
it
of
comes
the
to
Shell
where there
company.
was some
I quickly-
cloud,
That was a major breakdown because the factory had
yes,
stopped.
IEBC
So I quickly consulted the chairman,
institution
rushed back to the company.
that has no trust as
After
it
consultations, we agreed to quickly
and
summon the
therefore,
board.
with all these
Because what had
questions
happened-
that have come,
There is a
and with
machine
all
called
the
the
clarifications
continuous
that
vertical
you have to
crystallizer
make
that stores excess material.
as you sit there,
Because the factory we were running was a bit
Kai
old.
Kissinger,
So that excess material has to go to
if
the
the panelists are having questions,
that machine called a
you
VCC.
can
It
rest
was a
assured
huge,
Kenyans
huge,
are also
huge
having questions.
piece of equipment.
Look at them
to
and
so
tell
that it
them
can store that
why,
material,
despite
then
all
process
the
it later on,
flaws,
so that we
on
ensure that
integrity.
all the sugar has been extracted.
they still
Now, when the breakdown occurred, a lot of that material
IEBC chairman.
went to waste. And
Me to ask.
subsequently, of course, following the investigations that were done,
Thank you, Chairman.
when this happened,
Mr. Kakai,
I think some staff who are
I
manning
heard you
a very, very
mention
delicate
that you have
place
planned
called the powerhouse.
for
I
observation.
think were excited to go and watch and see what had happened, and therefore that led to the breakdown in the turbines of the powerhouse
Out
late-
of your experience,
to this.
now,
Now, of course, we had to
career,
undertake
what are
investigations
the
as a board,
competencies that you have peers
chairman, some of the board, and it was agreed that
that are outside the
responsibility
legal
be assigned.
profession
I think after
you
the
can
investigations, some officers were
to
censored
steer
and
the
dismissed.
IEBC to the
People
next
I
level
worked with, and you know,
as a chairman?
every time you think something has happened as a result of an accident, you think you want to forgive, but of course the decision was collective, they were sent away. I felt it for them, but again, it had to be done. And
Thank you for that question.
of course, the board was able to convince the ministry
As you
to allow us to
observed,
draw funds,
elections,
which were in excess of
when I said
150
8
million.
countries have
We bought the
consolidated
machinery from
certain
India and 6 million
skills,
breakdown in the
and
powerhouse.
in essence
Which
acquiring
was
them
done, and that cost a
as now my
stoppage of about
coordinator in
19
terms
days
of election.
in government
One,
circles. I think that was
You need to understand
quite
administration.
some tremendous loss.
In the countries and in
I
the
was
places
able
I've
to,
visited,
with the help of the board,
I've been able to
steer
understand
through the crisis.
that an
We
EMB
resumed operation after about
can
19
easily
days.
mess
and
the election.
Yes, some
If
people went away.
the
It
administration,
was aside for
the
them to go
governance
away
structures of that
for something
institution,
that really was
and
not
the
deliberate.
management of that
But that's
institution
something that I thought
is lacking.
was fairly
That is a skill that I want to impose
challenging for me.
and try it
Thank you,
here
Mr. Chairman.
if I'm lucky.
Thank you, Mr. SIMIYU. Thank you,
The other
Chairman.
skill that I've
Thank
been
you.
able to know is the
Leader,
governance.
now I would like to ask Carol
In most of those
Kituku to also
institutions,
engage.
you realize that during election,
Thank
things
you,
become so hot.
Mr. Chairman.
And you need to have
And good
somebody
afternoon once
who
more,
brings in
Wakili,
these
and
soft
welcome.
governance skills
I would like us
to
to have a
minimize
conversation
or
on
reduce the
party
chances of conflict.
nomination process.
That is something that I
and
want
what
to
mandate
leverage on.
do parties in Kenya
Another
do
skill
nomination?
that I want to bring is that I have a background of human rights and in elections.
Yes,
I want to see
parties do.
what is the human right component that we can bring in this
I do not
institution.
know whether you're asking
Why
about
do we see
the nomination
some
list or
members
the
of the IEBC
nomination list.
losing their lives,
Yes,
dying, and there's
in
no
our
skill to compensate.
election,
These skills are what I want to bring, innovate them from other countries. I've seen
dispensation.
them working. I want to see
There
how
are
this
certain,
can work. And these are the skills that I want to bring
realizations that
over
have come
and
that,
above my legal
we need to be
training.
sensitive
Finally,
to
I want to bring a skill
the
of
manner in
reform.
which
I've
positions
been
of
privileged to
leadership
do
are
reforms
distributed.
in terms of following up
And therefore,
on every
parties
year's
are
election
given the
report whenever a country does an election,
privilege
and ensuring
in
that those
constitution
recommendations that have come
to
from
nominate
those reports
some
find their way
members
in the legal reform,
outside
the policy
the
reform,
elected
or in
ones
the administrative reforms.
to
That is
fill
the skill
those
that
positions
I think
that
I
are
have
made
and I want to
to
bring.
cushion
Finally,
against
Chair,
the
those are hard
two-thirds
skills, but
requirement
they're
of
also soft
public
skills.
service.
You
Now, for
cannot
Parliament, for
manage
instance,
an
there are
EMB
the 10
if you don't
nomination-
have soft
12
skills
nomination
of
positions,
how to manage it,
and which are,
if you don't know how
I think the parties are
to have
given
synergy in
to
an
present those nomination
organization,
lists
if you don't
prior
know
to the
how to be
election,
a team player,
and
if you
depending
don't
on
know
how the
to
party fares
manage
in the
conflict,
election,
even the slightest of the conflict,
the
you
distribution
must
of
have
the
those
nomination
soft skills,
seats
and I possess
will
them.
be
Thank you.
in accordance with how they are
Mr.
fared
Kakai, do you
proportionally.
think that
That also applies
having
to
mediation and
distribution of
arbitration
nomination
skills
seats
is important
in
for
the
the job
county
that
assemblies under
you
Article
are
177.
now here for?
And of course,
Yes.
that
As a lawyer, I
nomination
also
mandate
participate in mediation.
also has to take care
And if I
of
reflect, for
the
example,
requirement that,
if I may answer that
the
question with the
marginalized
help
groups have to be considered.
of experience, if I
Women
remember the
have
last
to be
election,
considered.
if there was any attempt for
disabled
mediation,
and
it
the
would have
youth.
solved what we witnessed. So mediation is a critical tool that
The-
a chair of IEBC can
the law
utilize. And you can call
deemed
in
it
any
important
mediator to
that
help
the
if you can't
party
mediate, but it's a
provide
softer tool
their
of
nomination
assisting
list
to
or whatever
calm
on the
down
party
things.
list.
Thank you,
Way
Mr. Kaikai. Now, to
before
just conclude,
the declaration of
please tell
results
this
or before
panel
the
whether in
voting
your
and
journey,
recording and the
in your
results.
career
Why do
journey,
you think this
you
was
have had
necessary?
an instance where you have been tested
Given our
and your leadership
history,
skills
our
have
electoral
come
history.
through at a point where there have been maybe an instance of pressure and conflict and maybe
The process of
external
election
influence.
is fairly sensitive.
On
You find
on election,
a situation where
I said that I've done 8 countries, and one
results
country,
of
without naming,
the engagement we
that
have in
country.
our political affairs.
we had we were doing a report,
requirement that this list
and
is
the report
submitted in
wasn't looking
advance
very good on them.
in my view,
terms
are
of
meant to
participation
ensure
of
that
women
any
in
disputes
elections.
that may arise,
It was
because
really
obviously the issue about
And,
determining who is
they didn't want
disabled,
information
able differently,
that,
the issue
we
of
try and
determining
how
issues of
we can make the report subtle because negative.
people are marginalized
That's a test.
would be
As
contentious.
a person,
And if they're
as a test of
contentious,
integrity
the earlier
as an
we
observer.
start the
And
process
since all of them are the one
and
charged with
listen to
the
these
reports,
disputes and
we
resolve
can't
them
do
before
that.
the elections,
We
the
all
better,
witness
because then
that
we have a little
participation of
disruption
women
in
is
terms of
limited.
the
There are
programs
very
for
few women,
elections.
yet you have a legal framework that allows you to have
So
women
there have
participating,
been
but you are not utilizing the
allegations
legal
in
framework
time
because of the
past
cultural
that
imbalance
most of the
that we have.
political parties
That is
tamper
one thing that
with
I was tested.
the party list as
Thank you very much.
was
Thank you,
made
Madam
before the
Vice Chair.
elections.
Allow me to ask
why do you think that is
Karo
so?
Kituku to also engage you in some
Particularly for
questions.
the
Thank you, Karo.
Special seats.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good
Sometimes, for me, it is
Kissinger.
just the issue
Good
of
afternoon.
discipline sometimes.
I would like us to have a conversation
the
around
feeling that
behavior for political parties.
so and so
and
perhaps is a
parties
better friend who will give more and more
This is
votes,
because, as you
and
know,
therefore
political parties.
I do not think
If you're
there is any real reason
person of the
why they
APC,
should tamper except
you
for
will
perhaps
be a
just some
stakeholder.
self-interest. That I didn't
So,
cater for a friend,
there
we
is
didn't
this
cater for this
contention
particular region. Those are
that
excuses that can be used
that
because
has always
the
been
moment
experienced
they sit to
each
determine
electoral
these
cycle
party lists,
on party
I believe
lines.
sufficient consideration
That
would
there
have
are
gone into,
challenges
but
that come up with
sometimes
nomination
I think we're not
processes.
sincere about ourselves, about
Elections
the
and
decisions we made because of
I would
maybe
like you
other ulterior
to
considerations
explain to
that
us
come subsequent
what
to
you
the
think
decisions
is
we
the
made.
problem and the gap
Well,
in that area, and how do you
Are there any
to address that
legal
gap should you
reasons or
become
grounds
successful?
that exist that actually mandate parties to
Thank you
change
for that
their
question.
allocation for the special seats?
Every
Are there
political parties in
scenarios
this
that can enable parties
has
to
a
do that
constitution.
Yes,
within
the-
the legal
Every
framework?
political party. These political
in
parties
my
are
view, they
registered by the
can.
Office of the Registrar of Political
For
Parties.
instance, if
The law has
any of
allowed the PPLC,
persons who have
political
been
parties, the committees to
earmarked
take a very
for,
critical role
and perhaps
in
from
managing of political parties.
the manner in which the list has
Now,
been presented
the
is one
conflict
likely to
of
maybe land
the
the seat of the
primaries are
marginalized
basically
or
an election.
women
the electoral cycle.
or
And then IEBC has a very big
youths.
role in dealing with the
He
political
dies.
parties.
if that
Now,
happens,
the
obviously
interplay
that is
between
a
IEBC,
reason that
the Office of the
would
Registrar of
be
Political Parties, and
a
the
good reason
Control
for
Committee
seeking
take
to
a very
change
central role in terms of
the
managing
list of the
policies around
nominees.
political parties. Now, the biggest problem with the political parties
So
comes
the reason,
with one,
circumstances?
the respective
Anymore?
constitutions. And what do they say in the
Somebody
constitution?
can possibly
when it comes
choose to
coming up with
change party allegiances,
for their candidates.
and
for political
really
parties
there will be no
in the
reason
election.
to maintain
That is normally the biggest problem.
that
The
particular
biggest
person
problem
on the
being they do
list.
not
That will be
rely
a
and
genuine
try
reason
to ensure
that can
that
advance
probably the gender rule
a
is
requirement
observed
to
because
change
primaries,
this
number one.
list.
Number two, the issue of
So
PWDs
let's
is
move
not
on to
observed
another area,
in that
which is
list, and the
technology.
issue of
the future, we are
women
told, is IT.
and minorities are not
Technology is the
observed on
future.
those issues.
So
So
if
that
you
is where
become the
normally the
chairperson
problem
of the
and the
IEBC,
anarchy and the
should you be
confusion
successful,
appears whenever
which
political
areas
parties
of
are
the
doing
electoral
their
system
primaries.
do you see
So to navigate
amenable
around
to technology
that issue,
outside
and of course the issue of
already
funds in
existing
terms of
areas
allowing
that technology has
women
taken
to
into account?
participate
Any
to
other
contest the
area you
election,
think can be
it's a very confusing thing.
benefited
So
from the use of technology?
to manage that conflict within
I want
political
to
parties is there has to be a very strong
insist on,
stakeholder engagement of the political parties themselves
moderation
to relook at their
the
constitution
technology that
and
has
the
been
rules
used.
in terms of nomination.
But before I do that,
The other thing to do is
Mr.
to
Chairman,
tap
with your
on the
permission,
skills of
if I could
PPLC,
just
which is by law
quote something that came out of
one
the
of the
regular
conveners in
report,
terms of bringing together political parties and as well as
where
IEBC. Number three, IEBC
regular Justice
are very
Regular
strict
commented that
on when to accept
the
this
sooner
or not
the
to accept
political
this. I
elite
know that one of the contention is
realized
female,
that
the male,
the cycle of
and the
violence,
minorities and the PWDs,
the cycle of
although we do not have a
unresolved election
framework,
disputes
to ensure that
will
the
not leave us
comply with
until
the parties to be gender sensitive,
and
we
mitigated
still have plenty of other means and
efforts
ways
are taken
of coming up with a representative
to plant some sense of integrity in our system.
Thank you for that.
Taken.
So, what in your
That was after
view
the
is
2007
specifically
elections.
the mandate of the
That if
IEBC
no serious
to ensure
concerted
that
measures are
political
taken,
parties operate
then moving
within
forward, the
framework
cycle of violence,
during
the cycle of rigging,
nomination
vote
process.
stuffing would continue. That has continued. It happened in 2012.
The IBC
2017
by law
same scenario
is
recurred,
required to
and even in 2022,
liaise,
that
coordinate,
scenario recurred.
and
There have
operate
been
together
persistent
with the
complaints about
political parties,
verifiability
political
of the
parties.
elections. Now, in terms of
But at the same that the IBC at the same time
over improvements
very
that
strict
I
guidelines
think ought to be
how,
made, or the
political
technology
parties
deployed.
are supposed to
My
deal,
view is
how
that,
they're supposed to deal with. You look at the political parties
I
Act,
would
if they're supposed to comply
insist
with those regulations and the rules under the
the
political parties
technology
Act to
team
ensure
that
they
exists
comply
within IEBC,
Does the IBC
or if
have
it doesn't
any
exist, the
obligation
brand of people
to
we think
supervise the
ought to
political
do
parties'
it
nomination?
don't exist.
Yes.
Pull them out from the many,
Tell us more
the
about
many companies that are able to provide this
It takes me back to
technology.
the question that I was
So
saying.
that
the
as we
interplay
prepare for the
between
elections,
political parties,
we
the
virtualize
political parties, liaison
every
authority, the IBC,
one of the
and,
1,450
parties. So the IBC will,
words
comes up
and
with rules
dedicate
to ensure that the
a
political parties
virtual
comply
machine
with those
for
rules
each
in
word.
terms of nomination.
And all of
Rules
them
nomination.
ought to be based
And if you fail to comply with
Tallying
those rules of
center.
nomination, then there are consequences to
the
that.
National Tallying
Okay.
Center.
So again, another
Now,
area
in
related
every
to
polling
that,
station,
on the campaigning,
whatever reports
there
are
is
coming
no law
out
currently
will be wired directly
that guides
to the National
financing of
Tallying
the
Center
So what would you
in the
propose
machine that
to be
is
measures that can
dedicated
be
for that
undertaken
particular
by
word.
ABC to regulate?
And this is how it will start. We ensure
Thank you for
that
that question. The
as soon
campaign
as the
finance,
elections
there's a campaign
are closed,
finance law. It's called the Campaign Finance Act
we
of 2013.
take
What happened is that when that act was
tabulation
in place,
of all
the
people who have
law
voted
was signed
before the counting.
who comes up with what
And
we call
in every
regulations.
polling station,
So we have the act
those
in place
figures
and a detailed
are
law, but we do not have
through,
regulations that support that act.
special
This matter has been
package
litigated,
sent to the
information.
National Tallying Center
and there are
in
several
the
courts that have opined
computer
on
that
this
is
issue.
dedicated to that
And
particular
the
word.
courts have
So,
said
Mr. Cyril,
that
without
you do
looking
not
like I'm
need
interrupting you,
Parliament
Yes.
to
I
enact
think there
regulations.
is currently
So
what is
the
happening.
solution,
So we're looking
and
at
it will
also
always be a
what is
problem in
existing
Kenya.
right now.
We are
What
going into
else
election
can
the next 2
technology
years. It will be a
help
problem.
solve
The
to
solution
bring
to this,
in the
if you remember what I said,
credibility of
simplicity,
the elections process?
is to allow IEBC
Through the chair, I agree that
regulations
to be listened to on this one because we do not,
which will supplement the
we've not in the
Finance
past
Act
insisted
13.
that
Who
we
should
take
allow?
the tally of all the people who have voted
To allow who,
The law
as soon as
should allow.
voting closes.
Chair,
What usually
the law
happens is that
allows
we take the
IEBC
list and
to come up
the
with finance regulations.
the
So
people will be
IEBC has to
counted.
do its work.
What I'm starting
It's
with,
only through that
as soon as
that
voting
we have
closes,
an election
we know
that is
the number of
contested
people who have cast their
fairly.
votes.
Because
Whether that's
finance
polling,
is
whether
a,
good vote,
is a
we take that whole number and weigh it
elections. Thank you.
to the computer that is
If
dedicated
you've
to
looked
that
at the
particular word.
2022
After that,
election
once the counting has been done,
report, it
we
has
take the
identified
number of those
some
who
of
have
the
been counted in that polling station again, and they are wired to the same polling, the same virtual computer for that particular word, so that all the 1450 words,
Should you be successful and you
all the
become
1450
successful,
virtual
IEBC,
computers will receive
what specific
results from
measures would you propose that would
the
be put in
specific
place
words
by
they are
the
representing.
IEBC to enhance
After that,
integrity
once the
and
counting is done,
credibility
then the
of
counted
the
votes,
nomination
an image is taken also and wired to the dedicated portals.
Thank you for that question.
And then
the simple answer comes
the technology that will be best suited for this
one,
is satellite
serious stakeholder
technology,
engagement.
where we would avoid
parties,
a lot of failures like
IEBC,
has happened
PLC,
with Safaricom and others, where particularly in remote areas it's
is to
difficult
look at
to
the
get
election rules
that information
that exist.
while at the time. To use satellite communication,
various gaps
and I think Starlight is
to enhance the electoral process.
what
And
is,
when you are looking at
in
these
focus
election
here.
rules,
Then,
you must ask
once we have
yourself
received that information,
whether those nomination rules
what the chairman
speak
has,
the
the
spirit of the
commissioners
Constitution,
have,
what is required in the
apart
Constitution
from
for nomination,
the votes that have
what
been
is
counted,
expected of the Constitution in
there
terms
is
of nomination, the outlook,
one
and
other
whether
standard that they
those
can
rules
use
speak
in
to the
terms of
Constitution and the
verification.
spirit of the law.
That
Those are
standard
the
of
tangible
votes
things
that were cast in each
I
of
will
the polling
have
stations.
to deal with.
I hope I'm
Maybe
clear.
you are
Yeah,
viewers.
thank you very much.
We
and I
use
wish you the
technology in
best.
voting.
Thank you,
What
Chairman.
would you propose? Like, what
Thank
do
you.
think
We
should
now
happen?
invite
Can we
Dr. Koki Muli to
promote
also
the use
ask
of
you some
technology
questions.
in party nominations?
Thank you. We have
Good afternoon, Wakil,
schemes,
and welcome again
and this schemes kit starts
to
already
this
from
dialogue.
registration.
When was the
process,
first
going through
election held
candidates, and then
after the
transmission of
promulgation
results.
of the
So it's a
2010
comprehensive system.
Constitution?
2013?
Now, the use of technology
When? What date?
is
Oh, I
something
can't,
that we must continue aspiring
have
to.
tweets, but I know it was in
And
2013.
we need to
Thank you.
come up with a new platform or a new portal, a new
Wakili,
system
you know that
to
the
ensure
election
that
day
even
is a
the
very
technology
important
is used
day
during the
and a very critical
the
stage of the electoral
primaries.
cycle.
Because even we are looking, and I'm a student
Can you
who
tell
says
the
that
panel
even we need
what
to be
activities
moving
take
to
place
have technology
during
the
the
AI
election day?
technology.
And
But
for more
voters,
time.
how do you reach out to these voters and you don't have money for
Probably usually starts at
countries
6
never
a.m.
fund for voter education.
for the
And we
country,
can ask that.
unless, of course,
We've seen AI doing very well in India.
the
and doing very
vagaries
well
of the
in
weather,
other ways. So
issues
technology,
of transport
there will
lead to a
there
delay.
will never be a
And in each
deficiency
event,
of
there'll
using
be
technology
compensation at the end of the
in an
day.
electoral process.
And as at that
Technology
stage,
answers that question.
officers
How
of
simple is that election?
the IEBC
All right, thank you.
would
And
have
just for me,
set the
what is
stage,
then-
they have the
what
machines
should you
full,
become successful, what would be your vision?
ensuring that the voters are identified, the register is there, and as soon as they open, then people come in, they're identified, given the ballot papers, we mark them, and
5 years?
depending on the, of course, right now I think there are about 6
What is your vision?
positions,
What do you
elected
think
positions.
ICT should look
Then they mark them and drop them in the respective ballot boxes.
We
After the
priding
voting has been done,
ourselves
that's at the end of the day,
for having
special clauses,
90
as is the practice nowadays, and then of course the counting is done at the polling
So
station.
where we are
Once
okay.
that is done, the
What we
results,
need to do
those
as
of the
election
presidential election,
What
are I
these
think
other
filled in
IT
Form
platforms,
34A, and
IT
transmitted to the
related
National Tallying Center. The
ideas
results of
that we can add
the
to the election?
county
make it
governor,
more
the county women rep,
Easy
the results of the
and
county
make it accessible to
senator
everybody.
are, I think,
For example,
counted and declared.
in
Are declared
education.
within the respective wards.
Why can't IBC come up with IT in voter education? We focused more on
Okay.
results.
Is there any announcement of results at the
Most of the
polling
images
station?
for Kenyans were focused
Results are not,
on results transmission, and particularly the
so
first
to
stage.
speak,
But we left a lot of
really,
IT space.
once voting has been done,
So we can have that.
there of course party
Technology
officials,
doesn't just mean
their representatives.
It also means
Once the returning
social
officer
media,
has finished the
any
counting,
other facilities that are used,
the officers will have to sign them.
Twitter,
And therefore,
X,
at that stage,
Facebook.
the results
How can we use these things
for
to
the
ensure that
for each candidate are announced at that
it's
stage,
100%?
including what has been tallied for
And these are some of the
vote,
things that
announced
my
by
vision to ensure that
before
for
they
the
are
budget
transmitted
of your phone,
to
you can ask a question, for example,
the quarters.
what is the name of my polling station?
Thank you very much.
And it will come and tell you a civic
Would you like to
or
tell
your voter rights.
the panel
It should
and
be at the
those
palm of
Kenyans
hands.
watching you
It encompasses
which
this
are those
post-direct scale in terms of election,
respective quarters
participation,
where the
in
results,
terms of electioneerness.
the different results of the 6 elections
So as a last
are
clarification,
transmitted?
what
There is the constituency
technology in
tallying center
targeting and
where the error number was to be taken. So the data,
The election
results and senator at
and the
the
law
county tallying
establishes
center. but the presidential
one of
result
the
are
electoral
declared at the
practices
National Tallying
is
Center.
information
But
by
after
association, for example.
all parties that are
But there's so much
represented
that goes out there which is not true
in the
information
election,
about really what's happening.
but the agents have
So,
signed
depending on
and
the
are
IT
certified that
extent
indeed
that
that's
is
the
there,
record
and depending on
what
the
was counted.
program itself, then it should be
Where are
able
the
to
results of the women rep taken?
detect and block
Don't take this as
one thinks.
my inability to appreciate
If there's a misinformation,
there are a major component of our
you can have before
our
the
life
election,
and our elections.
like,
They are also declared
died, and therefore
the
there will be no
county
election there. And so that will
Sorry,
depress.
I
That's
just
what
saw
I'm
it
looking
before.
for.
Not
So can we have a system
No,
that's
that's,
entirely within the
that's
ICT
okay.
department
Joaquin.
of the IEBC? that
During
now
the election day, there are specific duties assigned to the chair
and the only true information
of
which is out to
the
the
commission and
so
members
IT
of the commission.
is something that
Since
is
you wish
expensive
to,
though to have IT systems in place, but I think
become
it's
the chair of the IEBC, so if you are successful,
Kisincha.
what functions or what role would you
Thank
be
you so much,
playing
Chairman.
on the election day?
Thank you. Allow me to ask Dr.
My
Kofi
view is that
to
on
engage
the
you.
election day, the chairman has, together with the commissioners,
Thank you very
sit
much,
together at the National Talent
Chairperson.
Center
And
to
good afternoon,
receive the
Kai.
results.
And it's
They
really
may not
nice
count
to
them
see you. I
personally
actually
or
had
physically,
forgotten
but through
that we
staff.
had offered you a
Once the results are
But
counted,
I'm really happy
it
as
is
we
for
kept
them
on
to
saying
have a
then,
conference
and we keep on
that agree
saying
that
now. It's actually
these are the
about the
correct
country
results and then
and
authorize
any
the chairman
contribution that we
announce
make
the results.
towards
But of course,
the
we also know
organization
that the
process
chairman has power
is
from the
contribution
decisions.
towards
I think the
value
decision
addition.
in
So I'm very
2022
happy that you actually,
election petition,
I remember the
because,
conversation
usually
around
you would find
whether to work
disagreements.
for IEBC or not the
Disagreements
election
normal.
management body. At the time,
Maybe
it
going out
used
there
to
to
be
verify each other is where
better
the
than
problem
now.
could be. But
and therefore, we
inside
are actually quite happy.
your own caucus, where you are sitting to make a decision, you can disagree and then by a majority decide that this is the direction we're going to
the
go.
position of
But
the
the ultimate announcement
Karibu
was to be
sana.
made by
I wanted to put you at
the
rest
chairman
and
of
also
the
to tell you that
IEBC.
so besides announcing the results of that you elections, as you say, you managed 8 elections. What else? Uganda,
The entire day.
in Zambia.
From morning to evening
I
of
wanted
the
to
election
know
day.
exactly what
Obviously, the results
did.
are like in the past, I keep circulating, but my
with the
suggestion was that,
EMDs
like
to
I was
manage the
suggesting,
processes
if we can have them
and also for how
wired to
long
dedicated
was this
virtual
assignment?
machines for each of the 1450 wards, it would be faster. But I proceed.
Thank you.
During the day, I think results keep trickling in. There
One
will
of
be
the main
disputes.
responsibility
There will be issues about
a coordinator of elections
just monitoring what's happening. And I think giving information
by
to
the East African community.
the stakeholders, because the moment you don't give information and perhaps they're lazy,
Your
and
work is
then I think
to
that brings the suspicion that brings about problems. But they must be engaged
your
to
work
consult with whoever wants to consult with them as the results are being tabulated and
the electoral
tabulated,
cycle with you
and
tell that
give
EMB
periodic broadcasts
the
of
electoral
what is
cycle
happening
that you are supposed
and
to
when friends are expected
that you are
to
supposed to
give a
adhere
final
to
tally of the results.
with a view of having
Thank you. Just
you come there.
two more small
You then
questions.
start
You
evaluating
keep on saying that results are
Each step
relayed from
of that
1450
electoral cycle.
wards. Are
That
those
EMB,
where the
election
election
management
is
body,
conducted
meets
or where
when
the
the
election
voter
are tallied? What is the 1450 and which results are those that come from there?
The 1450, Mr. Chairman, 1450
on
are
campaign
the wards
and campaign issues? Did it
the
miss
counts
anything on
throughout
voting?
the Republic of
If
Kenya.
it did,
For
you then identify
What results are coming
issues
from the
that were
1450?
missed,
the
and those
of
issues from
results for
As I
the ward
said,
representatives,
my responsibility
women rep,
was to
the
come up with
member
a
of
mission
parliament,
report.
presidential vote,
And
senator,
therefore, it forms
all
the
the elected
organization
positions.
to help
Thank you very
that
much.
EMB
Lastly,
manage future
what do you
elections
think,
in Africa.
how long do you think when you become the chairperson of the
You also,
IEBC,
as
how
a
long do you
responsibility,
think is reasonable
give them
to have the
guidance,
declaration of all
advice
the election
of where you
results
think
in Kenya
they
after
ought to.
elections? How many hours do you think we
You
should
check them.
clear? Because you said that the polling station closed
We also warn
around
them
5 p.m.
that don't go that direction.
If they are counting between 700 and 1,000
Because the law
votes,
allows you to do
they
that.
should be finished within, let's say,
Finally,
at
it was my
worst, maybe 7
responsibility
or 8.
to read the entire
So
constitution
from that
of each of
period,
those countries.
how many
my
hours do you think all the technology we have with everything that IEBC is aspiring to be, and with the transformation that you have told us here you will do when you become the chair, if you're successful? What should we expect from you to announce? What time should we expect the announcement of results to bring in
Thank you
some?
for that question by saying this.
We are very
But,
concerned, of course, about the perennial problems,
The problem
the challenges we
In the
experience
past
every
has
election
been
year.
that
There are always problems
we take a long
associated
time
with
to announce results.
acceptance of election
And
results or challenge of the
This is
same,
basically because
especially
sometimes
presidential
we're relying on
elections,
technology
the
that
2010
we
constitution.
fail
We
because
want
we're
to
using one
have
dedicated
a
line
rebirth,
to transmit all results to the tallying
have a
center.
country where
There'll be jams
the
along the
election
way,
management body, i.e. the
There'll be
IEBC, that if you are successful,
gridlocks along the way. That's
But
why I'm having this proposal that
a
instead of using one
process that
line of
gives us
communication
election results
to relay
that are
results from
accepted by
every
all
part of this
participants,
country,
and that
let's have
within
a dedicated
a peaceful
virtual machine for each ward.
environment where
And that way we avoid
the election is professional,
gridlock, we avoid the
and
jam,
so on and so forth.
so that results are released faster.
If you are
And
successful,
if that becomes the case, then if polls
there will
close
be
at 5
a
o'clock,
lot
or
of
if there's been an extension, they go on up to about 6 or 7 o'clock,
what I've just said.
I expect that
So with
if these
those
measures are put in place,
and reforms,
we should have all the results
bring
at the National Tallying Center by about
identify for the panel
9 o'clock.
the 3 priority challenges
The
that
beauty of
face
having to relay these results
democracy,
directly from the ward,
the
from the 1450
environment in
wards,
Kenya,
is that
so that the 3 challenges
you do not give
the
people
IEBC
reason
faces
to start being
in
imaginative.
advancing its work.
They become imaginative
Just 3
when you have
challenges,
given them a chance to
and
see
then
those
outline
results
for
and
us
count them. That's
how
why I
you
propose
prioritize
that
them
whatever
and how
votes have been,
you will address them
to
to give Kenya that
voted, you do
dream
not wait
destination I've just
until the counting is done. Let's release first the raw figures of how many people have voted. That is a check in the sense that if anybody wants to bring in more results, at the end of the day when you're at the tallying center, we'll say, but the initial results should were that the only 400 voters here, how come now you're 500? That is a very, very, very good check. So for me, if this is implemented, and by about 10, 11 o'clock, we should have all the results of the tallying center, depending on the deliberations that the commissioners have. Before the end of the night, the results have to be announced. We can't take the 7 days that we've taken in the past.
That's a very big challenge.
Thank you very much, Senior Wakili. Thank you very much, Chair.
How do we deal with these gaps?
Just to
Can we
ask,
do
is the
it within the
1450
shortest period of time?
center of relaying
Something
results
that will
something you are
complement
proposing, or
what
this is what is happening?
I'll give an example.
Mr. Chairman, is
Latest reform.
initially I was asked
We are lucky
what,
that we have the
what
electoral
reform measure would you want to come up with in terms of result transmission? And that's why I said that if we get a dedicated machine for every word,
with the issue of
we will release the results first, relay the results faster to the tallying center.
that
That is what I'm proposing as a reform measure, not what exists as
as
a
a very hot potato
Okay, thank you.
in the room. How are we going to deal with this?
Sorry, I was actually assuming that that's what exists. If you don't mind, what exists at the moment? That's the first question I was asking you.
We have to look into. As we deal with
At the moment,
we also have to ask
the results are all
the issue
released
of credibility
using one
as a big challenge.
one dedicated line.
That the institution is not
They
credible.
are not results from
Good or
each
for bad reasons, for non
each award being released to a dedicated machine for that particular ward. And therefore,
lucky.
more delays come, like happens now. We're using one dedicated line and there is a gridlock and there's a jam, so it takes a long time to have one person
what
get
advantages
to
do I
release
need?
results.
What do I do?
That's what is happening at the moment.
And how do I
Okay,
put the
thank
process
you.
in place?
I want to ask Mr. Peter, and me to ask you some
I
questions.
foresee in terms of
No,
this
WASILWA.
is the lack of
You, when you were introducing yourself,
the lack of
you said, what are you currently
IEBC
engaged
Act
in?
Section 8
I'm practicing advocate.
allows the formation of
In which law firm?
the
The firm is
IEBC.
called BS Advocates.
We don't have it. And
Do
IEBC
you have a practicing
to
license
ensure that
for 2025?
those
We've applied
monies that are not coming from
submitted. We have up to
the
31st
exchequer
to
are acquired from other
31st of March
development
to get
partners
the
to enhance the electoral
certificate, I
process.
believe, allowed.
So those are some of the
So
issues.
now you're practicing without one.
And I've tried to see
Well,
how
like I
I
said,
can
Mr.
deal
Chairman,
with them
usually
in terms of
at the
reform
end of the year,
and
the
in terms of
financial year,
lobbying and negotiating with relevant
we have
institutions
to get
to ensure that
an
there's
accountant
proper
certificate.
legislation and the
Once
things
you
taken
get the
place
certificate,
for the
then
purpose
put together with
of
the
having
papers
a
and
great
send them
election.
to the Law Society. And we have a grace period up to
Thank you
31st
very
March
much,
to
Kakai.
get
Thank you very much,
the
Chair.
practicing certificate.
Okay.
Thank you.
I've also seen that you're a member of
Allow me to ask
Chartered
FCPA,
Institute
can we, to also ask some questions?
Certified Secretaries, actually Institute of Certified Secretaries.
Yes.
And welcome, Bwana Kakai. The status is that
Now, let me start. I was looking at
you
your
have
document
outstanding dues
and I saw there are some
insufficient
CPDs,
CPDs.
judiciary. You are the accounting
Yes,
officer.
Mr. Chairman, that is true.
What
I do not
circumstances are
practice
under-
as a certified public secretary for a long time, and as a human being, sometimes we could easily have something delayed.
It's a standing
Have,
position of the judiciary. Was a
In
deputy
fact,
chief
I've
of
been in
registrar.
communication with them of fees of 12,000
But at some point, or at some
I'm
time,
going to pay. So that
then
I
chief
make my
registrar
expectations.
exited.
Why I'm asking, why I'm specific on that one
And
is
as they
that
were seeking
you are a
for
company secretary
employment,
for Nzoika
any
Mbembe,
institution in
Yes, I
this
was.
country
and
will always
that
have
is what
a
led you to
temporary
who you
person
are in terms of.
as an acting
career
accounting officer.
And
Therefore, you are
also,
limited.
you
The terms
do-
of reference are you are not a full accounting officer. Your terms are just limited
you-
for holding the
how would I
position.
put it?
So you don't
That should be
incur anything. You don't
It's what
give
built
any
you.
payment.
It's what made you the
only
CEO,
spend
you
what was
are the
approved
CS.
by the former
And
accounting officer.
for
So it's an
purposes
interim
of
measure
governance,
which is normally put in
corporate
government
governance,
to ensure that there's no
that is a
backdrop.
profession of governance
So it was for a
that
very short
you
period of
are
time.
exhibiting while you are the managing director.
Authority to
I did not exhibit that. I never didn't experience had any lapse in
Being an
terms
accounting
of
officer.
delay in
You
pay.
would note that
I was up to date
other
throughout the
than
period. I was
the
company
Service
secretary
Commission,
and managing director.
the other constitutional commission that has the highest
Compete
allocation
very
of funding
effectively with other
is
products.
actually IEBC.
Mr. Chairman, members,
So what would be your role
due
as a
to
chairperson
the
of
facilitative effort I had with the other managers within the company, in the year 2012, we had a record production
thank you.
of 71,000
If
tons
I
of sugar
happen to
made
be the chair,
for the year
I hope I will.
2012, something that had never been attained since inception of the
My
company,
responsibility
and
is
in the
not
year they also
that
made
of an
profit
accounting officer.
of nearly 800 million
Because
shillings.
IEBC,
The company had never
independent
declared a
institution,
profit. In fact, it was
has
a
a
SAUL.
CEO. The work of a
So,
CEO
Mr.
is
Chairman,
basically
that is SAUL
accounting
SIMIYU
officer.
WASILWA.
My responsibility as chair
So how would you
be
bring this
oversight.
as a valuable asset to IEBC?
You oversight the operations of
When I joined the
Secretariat.
Zoya Sugar,
My responsibility
I was
will be policy.
tagged an outsider.
You
because
form and come up with the policies with the
there are
help
many others who had
of
been
the
there
other
working there,
commissioners,
and I was
and
from
you do
legal
that.
practice.
The only
So at the
issue
time when I was
that the chair has
promoted
in
to the
terms
position of managing director,
controlling
obviously,
the accounting
the more
officer
assistant managers thought.
is if you
It
look at
was
the
unfair,
corporate
I would
governance
say.
of IEBC,
But
which happens to
I was
every
able
institution,
to
and you
harness
have a commissioner
the capabilities of
from the
all the senior
government
managers, the
agency of six
engineers,
commissioners,
the
you have a
agriculture
commissioner sitting in
experts,
various committees.
transport
Where?
experts,
So
for
you
us to be
sit,
able to
IEBC I think has
work
9
together as a team
HR,
to get
IT, and audit. And
This,
the rest. So you'll have a commissioner
accolades that
sitting
I've
there.
just indicated.
It is that
In fact,
commissioner
to mention also that in the same year, 2012, in terms of good human
sitting as a member who will
relations
give you
practice,
briefs in terms
who
of
are
corporate governance, built-in mechanisms
noticed
that
by
are
the
enshrined
Minister
on
of
the
Agriculture.
SIMIYU.
We usually had
So the chair only
yearly
receives at plenary
congregations
those
where
reports, but you are not involved
companies
at
would
all
be
with the day-to-day operation
given
in terms of an accounting officer. The only part you get involved
to
is
say
when probably the
some
accounting officer
congratulatory
and
tag
tells you we need to go to
for
Bunge
either
and
being
we should
perfect
more
or
funds,
good in
we need to go
audit.
to this and lobby
For that
money,
year,
with
Nzoia
our
Sugar
development partners
was
who are
singled
going
out
to
as
give us funds,
having
but you have
wonderful
policy briefs in terms
human
of
resource
So
practices,
your role
and
as chair
we're
is
given
to
that
escalate
accolade.
to your lane,
So to be able
to
to
avoid
attain
unnecessary
high
squabbles
production,
within the institution.
a production that had never been attained by the company,
Or
before,
down, because
it
you
required
said as a chair you will
skills
be
to steer
responsible
managers you
for
have had
finance
worked
and
with for a long
reporting.
time to be able to
Sitting
see
as
your
a committee
vision
in that
and
committee,
agree that how you can work together
And I
for
would
the
assume this should be
betterment of
like
the
a
company.
finance committee.
I think I can harness those
I think there are
skills.
7 committees at IEBC.
correct.
So
there
brought
will
all
be a
these managers
commissioner.
together for
So
us
what will be the role
to
of this
make the
commission
gains and achievements that we did
in this
Nzoia Sugar
specific
Company.
committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I want to follow that with the
Thank you. Just out of curiosity, you
The
made
last petition
71,000
to
metric
the
tons
elections.
in 2012, you said.
and
Correct,
there was one of the
Mr.
senior
Chairman.
councils.
So was this out of
made a
existing
statement
cane,
that,
or it was cane poaching?
it is not the work of
not this the same time that Mumias was going down.
IEBC. Whether in
Mr.
majority
Chairman,
or
something else
minority.
perhaps I didn't point out, there was never any cane
So what
poaching
would be
by
the
Nzoia
role
Sugar. If anything, the cane that was
Commissioner
poached
in
during
any
that
of the
period was ours.
committees that will
And
be set up?
through, again, my collaborating
One of
efforts with the managers in
the good
agriculture,
practices of
we
governance
managed to develop a lot of cane,
and corporate
and
management.
we had excess. In fact, we were giving out cane to
If you look at
Mumias Sugar, Botali Sugar Company, and West Kenya, because of the excess cane that we had developed during my period. And even after the time I left in 2015, we had sufficient cane for milling.
who is the accounting officer,
Congratulations. I want to ask Linda
Alone.
to ask you some questions.
without
Madam Linda, please.
oversight. Remember, one of
Thank
the
you, Chairman.
responsibilities
No, Mr. Simiyu, I heard you say that
is oversight.
while at Nzoia
The only
Sugar
way
you had
the
to
oversight,
harness
in my
some
view,
skills
will be sitting in those
that
committees.
were important
You need to know,
help
for
you.
example, if
in,
they are
executing
procuring
your
ballot
mandate.
papers.
Now, are you able to
Was
tell
the
this
law
panel
followed?
which skills are those
Was the
that you
best bidder
harnessed?
awarded?
A little bit of
Are we
misgiving.
in line with everyone?
Like I said,
Have
I
we sought
was
for
a
opinion
kind of
from
an
the
outsider
Attorney General,
coming from
whoever
the
it is?
legal profession.
You need
and
to be there. Now,
indeed,
your role
we
there
as well
is
that
therefore only
a lawyer
oversight
can't
and knowing
run a
what is
big
going on.
manufacturing
Remember,
concern.
the spokesperson
My ability to harness
of the
their
IEBC
different skills, my ability to identify that all of us can do,
at committee level
and alone
by
you can do much.
commissioners.
That
How
is
will
what
he then
I intend to
get
bring
the spokesperson to speak about
to
what?
the IEBC.
So that
And I know
commissioner
that
in
IEBC
plenary will give the report
has a large
to all the
pool
commissioners
of
that I sit
well
in
qualified
HR. These are the
persons.
challenges in HR committee.
must be lawyers,
How we are solving in this
must
committee
be
is
finance
like this.
specialists.
So we are moving forward.
With whom,
ICT.
if
we don't have
the approach is right,
proper
approach
documents,
that
or we don't have proper
recognizes
systems,
the value of each and every one of us, the value
are feeding to
that we need to work together,
The chair is
that
asked
together we are better than
members of the fourth
one,
estate. He will
then
say,
we shall
"I'm
be able
aware
to
what's happening, and I'm
steer
oversight."
through
You
some of
can't
the
be-
problems that
you
are
can't
beset
ignore it.
by
And that's
IEBC.
why we need to have
And
synergy
what
in that institution.
competencies do you
The role
believe
of the
are
chair,
essential
the role of the other
for
commissioners vis-à-vis the
the
CEO, we work
chairperson to
together.
be able to execute his mandate?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members.
That is
IEBC has
your proposed way.
a large pool of
But the reality on the ground,
stakeholders.
which is actually
We
confirmed
have
by public accounts
the main one, political parties that are
even the Auditor General
certainly
in the various
must be
reports,
recognized.
is that
They are
there have been
the
incidents,
political leaders, they are
the commissioners,
the other stakeholders that we have to deal with them in terms of supplies, the media,
had conflict,
and unless
either in
you are able to
procurement
give them sufficient
processes,
recognition,
hard cases. I
unless
think they cited
you are able to
Kimski, the procurement.
understand that all of us are fighting one common
as a
cause.
reform expert, because you've told us one of
And unless we are trying to execute this mandate together with knowledge,
So how would you address it? Because the reality
spilling
of
over
the
to
ground
all
is
the
that there have been
stakeholders
issues
in equal measure,
of conflict.
then we stand the chance of perhaps being accused of
Secretariat. Thank you.
being favoring particular sides, favoring particular political
Number two,
dispensations.
I don't think there's
That should not happen. What we need to do is to move forward,
there.
bring them together, and as we move towards ensuring that we have an election that's credible.
I think,
So,
and sometimes it's very
in
difficult
your
to legislate.
career journey,
Some
do you
things
have
it's
any
just common
particular
sense,
instance
and some things it's
where
just what is
pressure
in your
was put
mandate.
upon yourself
You cannot
in
legislate enough
mandate
policies to
in
everything.
whatever capacity
One needs to know
that tested
role and
your
responsibility
leadership skills, came out strongly?
we are dealing
Would you like to share that
capacity
with
system.
this panel?
And the only way you know
Somewhere
is
2011
that.
or 2010, I can't recall
But
exactly.
then when you are there
I was in
you
Nairobi
need to keep
on
your
official duty,
and know that my
and
responsibility
I was told
You are
that
there for the good
there
of
had
the
been a
country.
breakdown in the
Because
powerhouse
unless you
of
oversight,
the company.
suppose the CEO
I
missteps,
quickly, that was a major breakdown
suppose
because the
we are not
factory had to
aware
stop.
that
So I quickly consulted
have
the chairman, rushed back to the
voting
company,
materials in place on
and
time.
after consultations,
How
we
would
agreed to
explain that?
quickly summon the
You need
board,
to have,
because what had
you are
happened,
in the kitchen,
there is a
you are not cooking.
machine called
aware
the
that
continuous vertical
I
crystallizer
want to understand
that
where
stores
we are.
excess
The
material.
reason why that is
Because the
there
factory we were running was a
governance
bit old.
is just synergy,
So that excess material
relationship,
has to go
and
to the
communication.
which
Which
that
is
machine called the
enhanced from the
DCC. It was a
secretariat, the
huge,
day-to-day running of the
huge
institution, and coming
piece
to
of
the
equipment
policy oversight and
so that
legislation.
you can store that material.
I think
then
that is
process it
difficult
later on
to reform that
ensure
area.
that all the sugar has been
Just
extracted.
recalling.
Now, when the breakdown
and
occurred,
telling
a
people
lot
to
of that
do the right
material went to waste. And
Now I've
subsequently, of course, following
Mwongozo,
the investigations that
Code of
were done,
Governance.
when this happened,
Is Mwongozo
I think some
applicable
staff
to
who are manning a
constitutional
very,
commissions
very delicate
and Mwaso IEBC?
place called the powerhouse.
And secondly,
Were
in light
to
of
go and watch and see what had happened.
the
And
ruling,
therefore,
there was
that led to
Engineer
the breakdown
Kamau,
in the
we
turbine
followed
of the
the
powerhouse.
case of Engineer
That
Kamau,
led to the
yes,
stoppage for about 3 weeks.
Ngilu,
Now,
with the EACC.
of course, we had
During
to
that time, there were no commissioners at
undertake investigations as a
EACC.
board. Chairman signed on the board, and
they
it was
were
agreed that
prosecuted.
responsibility be
And
assigned.
they went to court.
I think
They say
after the
there were no
investigations,
commissioners at
some
EACC.
officers were
And in that
censored,
ruling,
and I think
It
it's
basically
listed.
say that
The
the
people I had worked
commission
with, and you know,
is the commissioners.
every
not a
time you think
secretary.
something has happened as a
So
result
that
of an
there can
accident,
never be
you
a
think you want to
commission
forgive, but of
without
course the
commissioners.
decision was collected or sent away.
So looking at
I felt
Mwongozo as a code of governance,
it's for them, but
to what
again, it
extent
had to be done,
is it applicable
and
to
of course the
constitutional
board was
commissions?
able to convince the ministry
Thank you.
to allow us to draw funds, which were in excess of
When you look
150
at
million,
the history of
to import
Mwongozo,
other machinery from India and fix the
and if my
breakdown
history
in the powerhouse,
serves me well,
which was done, and that cost
Mwongozo
a stoppage of about
came
19
in as a
days.
code of
In
principles,
government circles, I think that was
and it was one of the key
quite
recommendations.
some sort of tremendous loss. But I was able
We
to,
all remember
with the help of the
that
board,
Kriegler came
steer
in
through
for specific
crisis,
reasons and reasons.
we resumed operation after about 19
In my
days.
view and my
And
understanding,
Yes, some people
Mwongozo
went
has
away.
been nice.
It was
tense
sad for them to go away for something that
And those
really was
principles
not deliberate. But that's
come or
something
follow
that I
in
thought was fairly
with the spirit of the Constitution.
challenging for me. Thank you, Mr.
So
Chairman.
it will still be
Thank you,
applicable
Mr. SIMIYU. Thank you, Chairman.
to any independent
Thank you, Linda. Now I would like to ask Carol
in the public sector.
Kituku to
There's
also
nothing wrong,
engage.
and the IEBC cannot be limited
Thank
to
you,
the tenants that are
Mr.
enshrined
Chairman.
in Mwongozo,
And
because
good
it's all about
afternoon,
transparency,
Mheshimiwa Wakili, and
accountability,
welcome.
fairness, and just how
I
you
would like us
manage
to
the
have
board
a
meetings,
conversation on
who
the
signed the minutes.
party
If you have an
nomination
objection,
process.
why should you write an objection?
And what
There's a book that you sign.
mandate, yeah,
So these are principles
to
that we can't wish
nomination.
away and are applicable to the public sector.
Yes, Parties do.
You did mention about
I do not know whether you're asking about
the campaign
nomination lists
financing
or
act,
the
and you
nomination
did
lists.
mention that the regulations
Yes, in
are
our
yet to be, is
election
it enacted or approved by the National Assembly? What did you?
dispensation,
The
there are
regulations
certain,
Yes.
are supposed to be enacted,
Regulations that have
drafted,
come
enacted
that,
by the
we need to be
IEBC.
sensitive
National Assembly
to
has got no role in the regulations.
So
the manner in which
I believe you must have done
positions of
your
leadership
background study
are distributed.
before you came for this interview. So what
And
is the
therefore,
status of those regulations?
parties are given
Have
the
IBC drafted them?
privilege
Have
in
they
the
ever been
Constitution
presented before
to
the
nominate
National Assembly
some
since
members
2013 when the act was enacted?
outside the elected ones
I
to fill
wouldn't know
those positions
because that
that are
issue
meant
was live in court.
to cushion against
this is guesswork. There's a possibility that
two-thirds
IEBC was
requirement
waiting for directions
public
from the
service.
court. Because this issue had
Now
been
for
litigated in
Parliament,
court.
for instance,
By the time the
there
court
are
was
the
making
10
an
nomination,
opinion
12
that
nomination
the
positions,
National Assembly is not
and which
involved
are,
in the regulations,
I think,
I'm
the
not so
parties are
sure
given
whether
to present those
IEBC
nomination
has now
lists
enacted them.
prior
But I'll
to
also
the election.
assume that
And
probably they are in
depending
draft
on how the party fares
ready,
in the election,
but they are waiting
the
for the
distribution of the nomination
commission to come
lists
in and
will
then
be in
push
accordance
them.
with
I
how
tried
they
to
are
look at
fared proportionally.
in my
that
research,
also
I tried to look
applies
at
to
the website, and I noticed that they didn't even have a
distribution of
strategic, they had a
nomination
strategic
seats
plan.
in the
So
county
probably
assemblies under
it's
Article
one of the issues in
177.
the current strategic plan if the new
And
commissioners come in. So
of course,
not sure the status
mandate
I don't know whether that
also has to
not ready,
take care
but all I the new commissioners will have to deal with the campaign
marginalization.
the shortest time
have to be
possible before
considered.
the next election.
Women
Last related to regulations.
disabled and the youth.
I think under the Statutory Instruments Act, the National Assembly normally says that all
deemed it
regulations
important that
have to
the
be
party
presented before them
provide
for
the
approval
nomination list, or what do you call the
before
party
implementation.
list, way before
Does
the
that apply
declaration
for
of results,
that require?
results?
When you look
Given our
sometimes Kenyans will stick to that BC has out.
You find
So I will stick
where
there. I'm not so sure whether the
lists
lawyers
submitted in
appeal or
advance,
appeal on board or
in my view,
but at the
are
same
meant
time,
to ensure
I
that
know how important it
any
is
disputes
because
that may
National
arise,
Assembly are politicians.
because obviously the issue
So I know
about
how
determining
important
who's
it is engagement.
able differently,
Those
the issue
because
of
there has to be
determining
something called,
issues of
so my assumption then will be
you know,
that when they come up or when they will be coming
people are
up
marginalized would be contentious. And if they're contentious, the earlier we start the process and listen to these disputes and resolve them before the elections, the better, because then we have little disruption in terms of the programs for the
they are
elections.
trained to stick to the law. There is
so there have
what
been
happens in the machinarium on the
allegations in
ground
the
is
time
different.
past
So I
that
think
most
that
of the
that
political
engagement is critical,
parties
and
tamper
that's why
with
we have the political
the party list
parties
as
liaison
was
committee
was
body under the
made
law which
before the
can navigate
elections.
around these
So
issues.
why do you think that is
Thank you
so,
and wish you all the best.
particularly
Thank you,
for
Chair.
the
Allow me to ask James Misati to take up and ask some questions.
Thanks
Sometimes,
so much.
for me, it is
also
just the
take
issue of discipline
to
sometimes
also
lacking.
ask you a few questions
The feeling that
related to
so and so perhaps is a better friend who would give more and more votes,
opportunity to
and therefore I do
during
not
the
think
elections.
there is any real
Scale and
reason
magnitude of
why
the general elections,
you turn
tiring
back
of temporary
just from
staff is usually
self-interest.
inevitable.
that I didn't cater for a
From where you
friend,
sit,
we didn't cater for this
from your
particular region.
experience,
Those are excuses.
what do you think will be the hiring
This party
temporary
list,
staff?
I
during
believe
that short
sufficient
period?
consideration
And,
are going into, but
how do you
sometimes I
propose
think
to
we're not
mitigate end of the
sincere
results
about
if any?
ourselves. about the decisions we made because of maybe other
I didn't
ulterior
understand the
considerations that come
I'm asking
subsequent
you
to the decisions we made.
that during
So,
the general elections, like 2027,
are there
it's
any
always
legal reasons
almost
or
inevitable that you
grounds
have to hire
that
temporary
exist
staff,
that actually mandate
clerks and other
parties to
So
change
what do you think are the
their
risks that
allocation
are
for the special
associated
seats?
with such?
Are there scenarios that can enable parties to do that?
Yes,
Within the legal framework?
In my view, they can.
I understand you now.
For instance, if any of the
In
persons who
election
have been earmarked for
and
that
approaching
nomination,
election time,
and perhaps from
the work becomes too
the
busy.
manner in which the list has been presented is the one likely to
But because EMBs
maybe
are
land the
limited,
seat of the marginalized
they rely
or
on
women or
poll officials hired from outside, clerks and
youths.
so on.
He dies.
Now you have
If
200
that happens, then obviously that is
constituencies.
a reason that
And therefore you have to hire
would
people
be
to fill in the
a good reason for
to man those
seeking to
290
change
constituencies.
the list of the
Now,
nominees.
the risk with that is cost.
So the reasons,
The cost
circumstances,
implication.
any more?
The cost implication
Um,
of hiring
somebody can possibly
every polling
choose
station, I
to
think, has 6, if my memory
change
serves.
party allegiances, and really there will be no reason to maintain
And you have
that
presiding officer.
particular person on the
So if
list.
you
And I
take
think it
that,
will be a genuine reason
multiply by the
that can
number of
advance
constituencies,
a requirement to
and you
change
multiply by the
list
number
that
of
is
days
designated.
that the election is being done. Normally stands
So let's
3
move
days.
on to another area.
It's a very
which is
expensive
technology.
process.
You know,
So the
future
main
we are
risk of
told
that
is IT.
is that
Technology
it
is the
makes
future.
the election
So if you
become very
become the
expensive.
chairperson of the IEBC, should you be
To mitigate,
successful, which areas
It will need
of the electoral
serious
system
stakeholder
do you see
engagement know
amenable
whether
to
we should
technology
continue
outside the already
hiring
existing
polling
areas
staff
that technology
for
has
the
taken
shortest
into
period
account?
of
Any
time
other
and spend
area
so
you
much
think can
money?
be
Or
benefited
do we
from
approach
use of technology?
like other countries where I've been? I've seen
I want
state,
to
public servants, public
insist
servants
on
being recruited. Of course, they don't earn a
moderation
salary to do the
the technology
election.
that
happens in
has
so many
been used.
countries. But then there's also a risk.
But before I do that,
The main risk is
Mr.
cost.
Chairman, with your permission, if I could just quote something that came out of the regular report.
Where the risks, the major risks we can talk about, because when we
where-
talk about, because if you are
Regular, Justice
going to
Regular
the chairman
commented
of
that
IPC, you should be aware that the number
the
of
sooner
polling
the
stations are already
political
known.
elite
So there is no way you can say
realize that
the cost will
the
be a
cycle
risk.
of violence,
The risk we may be
the
talking
cycle
about
of
issues of security
unresolved
risks,
election
the issues
disputes
of logistics,
will not leave
and
us
there may be
until
getting people to the system to
unmitigated
handle documents who are
efforts are
not well
taken
trained. Because
to
I
provide
should
some
not
sense
think
of
that
integrity
the
in
issue
our
of cost
system
should arise,
are taken.
because
That was after the
I should
2007
expect that if you are
elections.
chair of IPC,
That
you should be
if
able
no
to plan
serious concerted measures are
early
taken,
enough, because that's where the cost
then moving
is
forward,
factored in.
the cycle of violence, the cycle of
So,
freebie,
issues of
vote stuffing
logistics,
would
issues
continue.
of lack of adequate training.
That has
some of
continued.
the
It
issues
happened in 2012,
Thank you.
2017,
because
same
getting
scenario
in new people,
recurred,
you may not
and
know
even in
them.
2022,
That means,
that scenario recurred.
politicians
There have
and
been
things.
persistent complaints
Now,
about the